All right, everybody, and welcome back to the Future Ear Radio podcast. I am pumped to be joined today by Chelsea Treseder. Thanks for so much for coming on the podcast today. How are you? How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me, David. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, wanted to have you on. As I was telling you right before we started recording, I've been on this series of these sort of like entrepreneurism in the world of hearing healthcare, talking to audiologists, talking to hearing instrument specialists, or people and entrepreneurs from all around the industry about, kind of like how you see your perspective on the state of the industry, how it's changed over the last, throughout your perspective and then where you kind of see it moving into the future. So, given that you and your family have been pretty entrenched in this space for quite a while, why don't you share a bit about your long family history in the hearing healthcare space?
Yeah, great. I would love to. Yeah, so I think I've never been proved wrong on this, but I also can't technically prove it myself. I think my family is the longest running family in the hearing care industry in the United States. So we date back to the 1930s. I had a great great grandmother who worked in a hearing clinic in Billings, Montana, way back then. So I think we're celebrating our 90-year anniversary as a
Wow.
family this year in 2024. I know you see those stats, right? Like a combined 90 years of experience. I'm like, we go back actually 90 years. I can't even imagine if you added it all up. So that was my great great grandmother. Her son worked for Sonotone, which was a hearing aid manufacturer based in New York. Um, Dave, you might be too young to remember it, but your dad, I'm sure would.
Oh yeah,
So
he's probably listening right now, nodding along.
okay. I was gonna say the older I get, the fewer people actually still have ever heard of Sonotone, but I'm gonna keep bringing it up. So that was my great grandfather, and then my grandfather owned a private hearing care practice in Athens, Ohio, which is the town where he raised his family. That practice is called Dials Hearing Center, and it's actually still there. It's under new ownership. He passed away about 12 years ago, but it's still there. And we go by and say hi when we're in town visiting my grandma, who turned 95 last week. So that's always fun. And then my parents met at Ohio University, which is also in Athens, Ohio, where the practice was located. My dad grew up there. My mom went to school there. That's where they became audiologists and met one another. And then they moved out to California in the early 80s. They got married. They purchased a practice that had been in existence in Northern California in a town called Santa Rosa. It's existed since the late 1950s, actually. So my parents purchased it in the early 80s. That's also when they started their family and had me and my two brothers. So yeah, it makes us the fifth generation, and between the three of us, there are 8 grandkids. So we'll see if any of them decide to continue in the family footsteps.
Continue it on to the sixth generation to make
Yeah.
you officially the
Yep.
longest standing family in hearing healthcare.
Feel
Uh,
like it would just be such a letdown for anybody to not continue it at this point, right? Somebody's got to. We got we
do,
got
do
one
you
of the
have
8. Yeah.
do you have any idea with your great grandmother and Billings or great great grandmother, how that all came to be? Like how she ended up in that position where she was the first of 6 generations?
Yeah, so it actually was because her son worked for Sonotone and then he got her involved in the business. So
Gotcha.
I think technically it started in his generation, but because he got her involved, it's how we're able to say
We'll
5.
allow that.
These are the little bits and pieces that when you start to get into it, you
Yeah.
find out. But
Multi-generation
they're
family business.
actually
I'll play referee here.
thank you.
I'll honor it.
A few years ago, we were poking around. I don't know about you. I always love looking at audiology practice websites because they're all interesting and look at people's logo and who they are and reading their history. We had found a practice that said that they dated back to like the 1920s. And I said, oh no, we're not going to be able to make our claim anymore. And we dug a little further and actually talked to them. And it turned out they had originally started the business as like a pharmacy and then
Mm,
added hearing aids in like the 40s or 50s. So we were still able to say.
doesn't count. Yeah.
So yeah, this is where I don't have it like trademarked or anything like that. But yeah.
All right, cool. Well, obviously you and your family have a long standing, perspective on this space. And so I guess I'll just be curious to hear from you, like when you were growing up, what were some of those early memories of like being around the business, and just sort of firsthand experience having played witness to like, okay, my mom and dad are audiologists. Is that something that you knew you wanted to pursue? Like, how did this all kind of shake out for you and your brothers where you decided to follow in those footsteps?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. Honestly, no one's ever asked me that before, but yeah, I would say I almost don't remember, anything outside of being in an audiology office. Our family had moved to California and we didn't have any extended family. So my parents had, just bought this little business and had three tiny kids and no family to help. So we spent a lot of time in those offices. I mean, I have memories of eating McDonald's French fries in the back office while my dad had to see a patient and my mom had a doctor's appointment. When I got a little bit older, probably around my oldest son's age, who's 10 now, filing, which of course is like a thing of the past now, but I think it's probably how I learned to like read and alphabetize was working for no pay in my parents' office. Even like just silly little kid things like taking envelopes and stamps and label makers and pretending to have my own little business using the old school paper supplies that existed in an office in the 80s and 90s. So kind of don't ever remember not, being part of that. And they're just because both of my parents were in the business, they're both audiologists, and this is still true today. Ask any of our spouses or our friends, like you're just always talking about audiology and hearing aids. Like we can be at a wedding, we can be at a pizza night at my brother's house. It doesn't matter. We're going to be talking about the business in some way, shape, or form. It's really just inevitable. So it's just kind of always been part of our family dynamic. Um, when you said, did I always know I wanted to get into this? Absolutely not. I mean, I went to college and as did both my brothers. We're very close in age. We're all only 2 years apart. So we went to the same college. We each had a different major. And I had no idea that I wanted to be in audiology or work in the family business. And I think it actually was at the encouragement of our parents that we each went out and kind of got other skills and experiences. I think had I just automatically become an audiologist and started to work in the family business, I may have loved it, or I may have always wondered if there was something else out there for me. So I think that was good advice to just kind of spread our wings a little bit. And sure enough, it was, a handful of years before we each ended up back in the business. And I think it's really good, not only for just kind of personal, satisfaction and things like that, but also the skills that we each gained by pursuing things that weren't at all technically related to audiology have given us some ability to do things in our businesses that we may not have had we all just kind of put our heads down and gone straight to get our AUDs. So, for example, I went to business school and worked at a variety of companies in sales and marketing roles, which has allowed me to do sales and marketing things at our various companies. One of my brothers he was a business major as well, but went into supply chain management for a major children's clothing retailer that you've all probably heard of. So he learned a bunch of Excel skills and management skills and things there that were for a much bigger business than your typical, hearing aid practice that he was able to kind of then bring back to our businesses. And my third brother was actually a music major, which, obviously the audiophile thing has some
Yeah.
crossover with the hearing industry. But he went and worked for a music distribution company in development and QA, where he learned how to build massive databases, which has also proven extremely valuable in one of our family businesses. And I think it's almost kind of crazy how we went out and got these skills that have now coalesced into being able to develop new things that actually do benefit the audiology space. So,
Coalesced and complement each other.
yeah,
It seems
absolutely.
like
Very
you all
different skill
have
sets.
different
Yes,
aptitudes. Um, I've met you a
absolutely.
number of times. I've not met your brothers, but just based on what you've told me, it sounds like you all complement each other really nicely, which is a really cool like aspect of your businesses is that everybody kind of has their own division of power and, territories, if you will.
Totally. I think, and people ask all the time, what's it like to work with your family? And I actually want to hear from you too, Dave, because I know you're uniquely in that position. But yeah, we get along great, just kind of personally. And then yes, because we each have our own sort of areas of expertise and or just things we enjoy, we really defer to one another in those assorted areas, in a way that I think helps us get along and then also, get things done. So how does it work for you guys?
No, very, very similar. I'm not fifth generation. I'm only second generation. But it's whereas my parents had like they were kind of yin and yang. My dad was very much sales and marketing oriented. My mom was more operations and the numbers and finances. And it's kind of like in many ways, I think that Oak Tree would not even exist if not for like all of the major contributions that my mom played early on. And the funny thing is, like, she was an English major, so she just sort of learned it all. She's a very, very intelligent person. So she learned it all just sort of on her own. But now for the way that we have it structured today is, I kind of have followed in my dad's footsteps, whereas my brother has followed in my mom's, and so very much, like kind of that same idea where it's like, there are certain aspects of my job that he doesn't really say like, what's going on over there. He just trusts that like, okay, that's his world. He knows this better than I do, and vice versa. So I feel like that's like a pretty important part of working in a family business is like having those divisions of power. I think it could get a lot trickier if they weren't as well defined. So I'm very
For
fortunate
sure.
from that standpoint that we are very, very different, like
I know you
personality
kind of have
wise.
to wonder, like, do families naturally create people that are different from one another,
Right.
or do you self-select into those roles because you have to differentiate from your siblings in like a pack? I don't know. There's
Maybe
probably some
there's
scientists
probably
doing research on out
some
there, but yeah.
birth order or some kind of like
Yeah.
psychology that you could go into there.
Are you the
Okay.
firstborn?
I'm the baby.
You're the baby.
You're the
Interesting. Okay.
firstborn,
Our
right?
baby is not the sales and marketing guy. So I don't know. We'll have to keep working on some theories there.
You're the firstborn though, aren't you?
Yeah. How could you
You're the
tell?
oldest. I no, because you've told me.
Okay. Not because I
Um,
look oldest, I'm sure.
no,
No.
no, not at all. Okay, well, I guess let's before we deviate too far, where let's cycle back to like your businesses. Okay, so
Yeah.
your parents obviously have the private practice, but why don't you share about, like you mentioned, you and your brothers went and you got these like outside experiences and skill sets and stuff, and then you brought it back. So share about like when you brought it all back together, what you guys have done up until this point and with your different business endeavors.
Great. Yeah. So we do, as a family, have three different business entities. So, yes, we have our practice, which is the one that's been around since the 1950s, that we've owned since the 1980s. It's called Kenwood Hearing Centers. It's located here in Northern California. We've got 7 locations. I think we're at 12 or 13, depending on if you count part time providers who work with us. And it's just been such a joy. It's grown and grown, and we see so much opportunity there. So, that's been really fun. Just, adding to our team, getting more efficient with our processes, bringing in technology. So that's kind of our, B2C business. And then we have two B2B businesses. One is Pivot Hearing, which is a practice development services group. It's been around for about 11 years now. With Pivot, we work with other private practice audiologists and hearing instrument specialists across the country and in Canada, and we work with them to help them grow their businesses and achieve their goals. So we work with practices that are, brand new and writing their business plan and trying to get loans to get started. And we work with practices who've been around for 40 plus years and kind of everything in between. So, as you can imagine, what we do with each practice is going to vary quite a bit depending on who we're talking to, the situation of their practice, the life cycle of their business, the market they're operating in, all of those sorts of things. But generally speaking, we provide coaching, mentorship, advice, and then we meet with our practices regularly. We use data to understand what's happening in their business and the opportunities. And then we put together strategic plans for marketing, recruiting, professional development, any sorts of things that they may need assistance with. So that's Pivot Hearing. And then just about 2.5 years ago, my brothers and I started another company, which is called MyVitalsPro. That one really came about by accident. We, as people who were trying to run a growing, increasingly complex retail audiology practice, found that we were drowning in trying to pull Excel spreadsheets out of our office management system and manipulate them and understand what was happening in the business. as we grew. And so we started looking around for a solution, and there obviously wasn't anything in the audiology space. And because of those kind of unique skills I mentioned before, in terms of like massive sets of data and creation of databases and management of those and software development and, understanding very complex business ideas around KPIs and supply chain and management and things like that, we somehow had the right set of skills to develop a BI tool for the audiology space. And again, never intending to do that for any purpose other than solving our own immediate need to better understand our practice. So I remember it was like October of 2021. And my brothers sent me a little link to something that they had created. And then they said, we're going to see if we can get the data to update automatically tonight. And we logged in the next morning. And this very, archaic now looking dashboard updated automatically while we slept. And we just all couldn't believe our eyes, right? Because before we would have had to get up at 6 a.m. and pull the spreadsheets and do the whole thing
Mhm.
again. And it had done it while we slept. So we were super excited. And that was really the birth of MVP. We kept adding features and functionality that would help us better understand our business. And then we started showing it to people on, the practice development group side. We thought, oh, wow, this is going to be such an awesome tool, rather than starting calls with our customers by saying, hey, how's it going? Right? We're going to be able to start calls and say, hey, we're looking at the data. We can see what's happening. Of course, we want you to tell us as well. We can't see everything in the data, but we can see a lot. And then that married with an owner's experience and what they're going through is really an amazing combination that, quite frankly, nobody ever had before. So we knew it would be valuable there, and that was really fun to get going on as well. And then, for we showed it to more and more people who, for various reasons, aren't good fits for the practice development services group. And so, a couple months in, we just looked at each other and said, "Oh my gosh, I think we have to figure out how to sell software," which wasn't something any of us really technically had experience in before. I obviously had sales and marketing experience, but we had never, sold software. So I will say that was a steep learning curve, and we probably did a lot of things not the way you're
Hmm.
technically supposed to do them. But we, like a small startup can, we just tried a lot of things, and we tried them quickly, and we would find out right away what worked and what didn't. So I can't say that we followed even the advice I would give an
Hmm.
audiologist starting a practice, like, hey, create a business plan and some projections. Like, we hadn't done any of that. We, of course, went and did that later. But yeah, so that's kind of, those are the three different entities.
I find it just so interesting that basically MVP came about. Obviously, you were your own first customer, which is always cool because you're solving for a very tangible, real thing when and then it's like that coupled with this really long-standing, deep knowledge of this industry, of this profession, of this market. And I've been, recently in the podcast, I've talked about this whole notion of one of the things that I think is very distinct about this particular industry is that relative to its neighbors, the other, kind of like adjacent medical professionals from dental to vision, is that you can kind of see the future coming because you just need to look toward our adjacent neighbors to see what's happening. So like managed care was a huge
Hmm.
thing that's already gone and happened and transpired in all these adjacent industries. Same with some of the like over the counter stuff like Smile Direct and Invisalign and some of these different things. But I think that one of the first thoughts when I saw MVP for the first time was like I've seen BI tools elsewhere, but I've not seen many in this industry, and it's like total like of course here it is. Um,
Hmm.
but it's cool that it was sort of developed by, someone with a really deep understanding of what the real KPIs are, what the actual kinds of things that, like, a private practice would be trying to solve for, and I think that's pretty powerful in and of itself.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. There's a lot of things I will say I've learned since we started the company that ideally you would have known before you started the company, but you got to roll with it. And one of those interesting things I've learned is that it seems like in a lot of spaces, the best software comes from industry people, not software people. And so I've had conversations with people in all kinds of different sectors, healthcare and way outside of healthcare. And I actually have a good friend who's got a software startup in the construction management space, and it's the same thing. He's a construction manager who saw a gaping hole for
Yep.
something, and he's spent 10 years building the most amazing software product in the world because he understood it so deeply. He was living it. He was having binders of paperwork he's having to manage, and
Exactly.
he said there's a better way, right? So I think I think you're totally right, and we've gotten this feedback from a lot of people once they see MVP is like, wow, you are like in my mind as a practice owner as far as what I need. And it's like, yeah, because we're there, right there with you, right? And totally understand. So say MVP is definitely an example of something that is audiology and hearing aids first. And then, we figured out how to make it work from a technical perspective from there.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it resonates with so many people right away, because you can really feel that as you interact with it.
So, like, what are some of those things that if you're someone that's not ever seen this before, you're showing it to them for the first time, what are going to be some of those things that really jump out at prospect that they're going to say, okay, that's actually very, very powerful?
Yeah, great question. So I can kind of name a few things. So there's certain things about MVP that are very high level that would be part of any dashboard you might look at, even if you grabbed something off the shelf that you could get to integrate with your OMS. So looking at revenue and payments and unit sales and projections and things like that. So MVP does all of that, of course. But if I want to look at some of the things that are maybe a little bit more specific to our line of work, I think one example of that would be just some very specific hearing aid and audiology related KPIs. So, for example, we break down your production, so your revenue, your payments, your units, however you want to look at it, into things like new patients versus existing and first time units versus upgrade units. So, things again that are going to be very important to an audiology and hearing care practice and kind of nichey and specific to what we do. We do a lot of breaking out between private pay and third party. You mentioned managed care already. I think it's arguably the hottest topic for any private practice you're talking to in almost any area of the country. And so, just a deep understanding of that element of the market was very much a part of the development of MVP and continues to be. I would say there's tons of rich features in MVP that already address that, and we're continuing to add more Medicare Advantage analyzer capabilities and things like that to help practices understand what's happening by harnessing big data into ways that they can actually use and interpret and gain insights from. Some of the other things, I mean, there's a lot of detail around hearing aids, for better or worse, they are kind of a real cornerstone of this industry. So one thing people really love is the ability to do benchmarking in MVP, which we do in the hearing aid module. We do in some of the marketing modules. We do just kind of overall across a lot of MVP, but being able to see how the way you're pricing certain technology tiers or even manufacturers and down to specific models compared to other practices in the country or in your region. Same thing across like marketing. Like, do you have more or less than the average practice in terms of patients in your database ready for upgrade? Are you doing a better or worse job than the average practice at upgrading the patients in your database? Things like that. Um, and then I would say another thing that's just been really cool and people have enjoyed is this market share analysis we have, where we can show somebody down to the zip code level exactly what their market share and penetration rate are, to understand, where are you really strong in your market? Where do you have opportunity to grow? So I would say, and again, using data on private pay sales, TPA units, things like that, that are very specific to what we do. I think you can just kind of really feel throughout this tool that these are things that are super specific to the way a private practice audiologist will want to look at things.
It's so cool. I'm curious, like the first time that you showed your parents as, longtime practice owners, what was their first impression of it?
So funny you say that. We always laugh because my he's an amazing guy. Like, he built his business over many, many decades. He's beloved by his team and his patients and everyone who's ever met him. He is so not a data guy. Like, I think he's blown away by MVP, like, in a lot of ways, but I don't even know if he has a login, which is so funny. So my mom's a little bit more analytical. So I think, they've from the start been super excited about it. And I think just been thrilled. My brothers are they're geniuses like in any world. And I think you want to talk about like best and brightest minds in our industry, like unmatched, so I think they're super proud. And they know, they still own the practice, but we as the next generation have really taken over the day-to-day running and management of it. And I mean, we live and die by MVP every single day. We're all in there all day, every day, looking at things, using it to understand our team's performance, our marketing performance, all those different elements that we're trying to understand and manage across a complex organization, and using it to try to constantly improve the practice. So, yeah.
It's so cool. I mean, it really is like one of just those cool stories of a lot of serendipity, like, a lot of things that broke the right way. And it all, like you said, coalesced into you all like kind of uncovering this really interesting application that doesn't exist in a widespread manner in this industry. I mean, there's obviously a lot of the different OMSs and the software, like databases and stuff like that. But the business intelligence tool and, being able to have a better, I think, like look into the state of your business and all these different views is super, super valuable. And it just seems like one of those things that I have to imagine after you described that day where you woke up and that the data populated, it's like, holy cow, we actually have something here. I mean, did it feel like from that point, like, okay, we're all going to go all in on this, or did you have to kind of wait until it materialized a little bit and you could see, oh, as the salesperson, I can sell this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question and something we definitely figured out as we went. I don't think any of us knew way back then, that first night, that this was going to become like its own exciting business. That kind of became more clear over time. And I would say, even now, none of us are quote all in on MVP. At least my brothers and I. We of course have employees now who work for us who focus all of their time and energy on MVP. But because we have the other couple businesses, we're definitely, we have different things we have to think about and look at on any given day. I think, you could make an argument that that's not great. You could also make an argument that it's part of what makes MVP so great, because we're really in the trenches and constantly creating new features and thinking up new KPIs and things that we want to manage our own business. So I think there's definitely some benefit to us kind of keeping our toes in some of these other ventures as well. I mean, same thing on the buying group side, because again, we're in conversations with so many awesome practice owners who have a different perspective. Like, I used to joke that early on, MVP was just a map of my brother's mind, which was cool, but it was exactly the way he thinks about a business, which is, by the way, better than the way 95% of people probably think about their businesses, and way more detail and things like that. But as we've got, I think, 960 clinics using
Wow.
MVP now, we are talking to so many different owners and practice managers who think about things differently. And honestly, it makes MVP better. We oftentimes take their requests and ideas and build them into the core product, or take iterations of them, or sometimes build people things that are totally custom because the way they're doing things is just super unique to their business. But I think it's made not only MVP better, but us better too, in kind of broadening our perspective about how some of the smartest people in the space are thinking about their practices in the future.
And what do you think, like, based on your experience in all wearing all three different hats? You had mentioned before, obviously the elephant in the room right now is managed care. That seems to be, like you said, probably the number one issue for the vast majority of practice owners today. Um, so, like, how do you kind of see that being handled by both the folks in the buying groups, the people using MVP, and then even you yourself? Does that feel like one of those things that is going to, um, I don't know, like basically fundamentally change the profession and the role of the profession? Or do you think that it's just another, um, I guess, another challenge that needs to be solved, and it will just be another challenge? Or do you think this thing's a different beast?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the $1,000,000 question. So I think,
Yeah.
yeah, it's the right question though. I think it's something that any private practice needs to be asking themselves and asking their advisors. I mean, I think it already has fundamentally changed the business, and I think, I know of a handful of practices personally where it took them out over the last couple of years between that and COVID, and they weren't adapting, and they weren't running super profitable organizations, and it took them out. And I think, though there may continue to be some of that, it's actually really interesting, Dave, because because of the amount of data that we have in MVP now, we're able to see kind of at a high level what's happening across, not all the private practices in the country, but 960 clinics. So it's a significant amount. And we see some interesting things in the data. I would encourage anybody who's not on our email list or anything yet to go to our website and get on there, because we are putting out some data with some regularity and doing webinars and things like that, where as we have new insights, we're trying to share them with the industry too, to help educate private practices and help them be informed to make their decisions. But I know there's some very smart thought leaders in this space who are projecting that managed care is continue to grow super rapidly from here. Um, we're not seeing that right now in the data. We're actually seeing some leveling off and even a bit of decline. Now, I want to put a lot of asterisks around that,
Yeah.
because it's 960 clinics. That's not all of them. It's also, the data set is all private practices. So this is not going to reflect what's happening in corporate retail or,
The
unrelated to managed care
VA.
so much, but Costco, VA, things. Exactly. This is not the whole of the industry. It's also, you could make some arguments like the practices that are in the MVP data set may be those who are more focused on their business and less likely to take managed care. So there's some caveats to the data, of course. That said, we're not seeing the steep increase that we have been seeing kind of consistently over the last 5 years or 10, for those practices who have data back then. So I don't know. I definitely don't have a crystal ball. Um, you know, our family tends to still be very bullish on the future of private practice. I think gone are the days when you can be a lazy private practice owner and
Yeah.
not, do everything electronically and not look at your business data and your numbers and manage them very carefully and, just run a newspaper ad reactively when the schedule's light. Like, gone are those days.
Yeah.
But I do believe that there is a segment of consumers who want to receive high-end premium care, service, and products from well-run private practices. And I don't think that's fundamentally changed. So I do think there's going to continue to be a place for very well-run private practices. We may lose some, while we sort that all out. But I'm really hopeful that a tool like MVP, I mean, that's really what it's all about is, we have this legacy in private practice and believe strongly in the value of it for the patient and for the audiologist and for the industry. And I think, if we can create and continue to improve upon this tool that's going to level the playing field between relatively small, low budget private practices compared
Hmm.
to corporate retail and
Right.
big box and managed care companies that we're competing with, then that for me is like the deep passion reason behind this, because that would just be super fulfilling for me, because I know that's an environment in which patients are very well served.
Yeah, like well, hold on. First off, what is the website that people can sign up to get in on this? That's
Great.
go for it.
Yep. So it's MyVitalsPro.com. There's a lot of information about the product on there, but you can also submit a form and then get on our list, and we'll keep you informed of, again, like kind of industry roundup type things we're trying to share. Webinars. We've been doing some interesting, like an ad hoc analyses using the data set around like, okay, what makes a TPA patient different from a private pay patient, things like that.
Mhm.
And we'll be making that content available to the industry as well.
I was gonna say though, I think that one of the I recently did a panel, like I hosted a panel, and it was with these four different audiologists that were doing different entrepreneurial things. And really, like my takeaway from that conversation was that, the each of these ladies that I had on had a different story, a different thing that they're doing. And while on one side of the coin you have like kind of these scary things like managed care, the vertical integration, these things that for the small guy really are concerning. Um, you also like here in 2024 is such an empowering time like for the small guy because there's so many new things that allow for you to like circumvent traditional barriers of entry. So, for example, a tool like yours in the past probably would have cost like you would have had to like custom build it and it probably would have been like hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions of dollars or something like that. And so now it's a subscription that a single private practice owner can have. And for me, like that, it goes exactly to what you said earlier, which is like, if you're not lazy, the I think the people that are probably most at risk really are the like very, very complacent. This is how the status quo. This is how we've been doing business for the past 30 years, kind of head in the sand, like all of the like, stereotypes of the complacent business owner. Those people really are probably in peril. But I think that like if you're ambitious and you're motivated and you're like driven, I think that you really do have some serious advantages afforded to you simply by like it being in 2024. So I think that it is kind of a two-sided coin where like you do have to take the good with the bad and recognize that while there are some looming threats, there are probably more opportunities as like a single person or a small business than really ever before. And I feel like you guys are a testament to that too.
Oh, I so agree. Like, and in some ways, technology is like a great equalizer, right? Because I mean, I don't know, I haven't seen like the corporate retail BI tools, but from what I hear, like they're actually not even as robust as MVP. So here we can have a private practice who's been open for 6 months, may have access to a better, insightful BI tool than like hundreds of millions of dollars organization, you know. So
Totally.
I
And they're
I, I really
nimble.
nimble, able to make changes quickly. Again, no red tape, right? To
Mhm.
stand up a new BI tool in like a massive organization could be a multi-year project. Like if somebody does a demo of MVP with me today, they can be up and running before the end of the week, right? So
Right.
things like that. And then yeah, like other things we're seeing as well that have been great for, again, I think small practices and large can take advantage, but just automation of marketing, right? And there's things we can do using kind of the data, the back end side of MVP to help people more effectively and efficiently communicate with their patients. So, I think sure people's inboxes are full and, all of that, but there's ways to really communicate to the right people at the right time with the right message. Again, kind of using technology in a way that allow you to be more effective and efficient than you have in the past. So, yeah,
Totally,
we're
and again,
excited about that.
that was a that like, these used to be, like, things that really were sort of limited to large organizations that had it was kind of a pay-to-play model, you had to be able to, have the money required for the software or for the technology or whatever, and so, like, today, I do feel like there's been this huge leveling of the playing field, and so, like, to your example earlier where you might be competing against a really large entity in your backyard, but the reality is that they have a lot of limitations that you don't. And so I think that's what's exciting is like you can be nimble, you can move very quickly. You can pivot when you need to from, like one source of revenue to another. So again, I just think like the agility that you are afforded by today's technology, like really lends itself nicely to a small business. And for me, I think that's going to be, I think that will be a trend that we'll see is just the private practice of the future. I don't think that type of person just dies out generationally. Like, I think that will continue to exist. I've met tons of young audiologists and people in the industry that are very entrepreneurial that want to have it be their own boss, that want to have their own business. And they're thinking about it along these lines of like, I think really challenging a lot of the like traditional assertions of like what it would mean to be a private practice owner. Like, do you need all the overhead that is traditionally associated with a practice? Do you need to buy a building? Like a lot of these like really kind of fundamental things are being challenged and in an exciting way, I think, again, in this like whole vein of empowering the little guy.
Yeah, I have seen a huge uptick basically since COVID of startup private practices, which I mean, I don't have any data on this per se, other than to say, been in the industry for a long time and talked to a lot of private practice owners. And I swear I get 2 or 3 inquiries a week now from practices who are starting from scratch. And some of them are fresh out of school, and some are coming from an ENT, and some have been working in private practice and have that entrepreneurial spirit. So, a kind of a variety, even like manufacturer reps wanting to, not get off the road and not travel so much and have their own business. So, it's been really encouraging to me that people feel so bullish about starting businesses because, it's hard. It's intimidating. My dad's business mentor had a great quote, which was, if owning a business were easy, everyone would have one. And I think about that a lot when you're in your kind of low, dark moments of business ownership, which are there for all of us at some point. I think there's no escaping it because it
Hmm.
is a challenge, and it also has the other side of just rich blessings. So I'm just really encouraged by the number of people who are starting practices today. And like you said, I see a lot of innovative models. So people who are starting mobile while they figure out the exact place they want to put an office, or they get some revenue going before they commit to a lease. And, I think that's great. And I've seen a lot of practices only need to do that for a couple months before they feel like, okay, now I'm confident and going to go rent a space
Totally.
or look at buying a space. Or and so I think, like you said, I think if you've got that entrepreneurial spirit, that's almost the most important part, because what exactly is going to come at all of us, we don't know. It's just going to be that drive to be successful and willingness to adapt as needed to, what's happening in the industry.
I was going to ask you too, like when you said that you had the background as a salesperson, you got your MBA, but it's a lot different than, like the realities of like, okay, now we just sort of uncovered this new business. We're going to like try to set forth and make this thing a reality. What was that process like for you in terms of, okay, um, your parents had the private practice, Pivot was maybe more of a collective thing. I don't actually know the origin of Pivot, but I'm just kind of like saying that, you know, that that whole for you personally, really kind of taking this on with MVP. And what was that like in terms of, you know, like those first that learning curve, if you will, like some of those failures and some of the stuff that like you look back on like fondly, even though it sucked at the time, that you're like, okay, that's just kind of part of being an entrepreneur. And these are the kinds of things that happen when you're getting started out. You're going to make mistakes, you're going to fail, but that's kind of how you learn, right?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, there's a couple things that come to mind right away. One is that, somebody I've worked with for a long time who I respect deeply told us flat out, do not start a software company. And he said, it's going to distract you from your other businesses. And, it's really easy to get into a cycle with software where you're constantly tweaking and tinkering and working on, but not focusing on making sure it's a profitable business. And I think his watchouts were valid, no doubt, but I certainly had his voice in the back of my head while we were continuing to build and invest in MVP, and it kept me up a lot of nights. I will say, I think I'm happy to have proven him wrong at this point, and he's a good friend, and hopefully he's listening to this. But there it's certainly to go out and start a software company when you don't necessarily know what you're doing. It had risks, and I think it's worked out really well, but nobody knew that at the time. I mean, another thing was just our pricing model, because we've created a product and a category in audiology that did not exist before. And so, I think whoever comes after us, if anyone does, will have a somewhat of a roadmap of like, oh, here's how to think about it, and here's what the key features are, and here's how you price it, and things like that. And we had to kind of figure all that on our own. And I think we tried 3 or 4 different pricing models, not so much price points, but just, I mean, how do you price it? Is it a subscription? Is it monthly? Is it annual? Is it by clinic location? Is it by practice size? Is it by data volume? Like, there were all these different ways you could do it. And, we had to just try a few different things to find something that seemed to work. So, yeah, I mean, those are just a few that come to mind. We've completely rebranded. So it was always more or less called MVP, but at first we tried a logo and branding that was kind of more of a sister spinoff of Pivot. I think the further we got into it, we realized kind of the importance of differentiating the two companies. Sure, there are a lot of ways in which they really work well together, but at the same time, like I said before, they're two very different businesses that can serve different types of practices that exist today. And so I think kind of differentiating them a bit more was a lesson we kind of had to learn as well. So
Yeah, no,
those are just a few of the things that come to mind. There's probably a list 100 things long.
I just find it interesting, like, because it's just one thing to sort of get that experience through a textbook, even vicariously when you're working in a small business or a startup or something like that. But like when it's your own, that's kind of a different beast. And I feel like, you know, there's just a lot of lessons that are translatable across different jobs and industries and stuff. So, I feel like a lot of these are universal lessons. Coming up with like when you don't, like you said, don't have a blueprint as to like here is the proper way to roll out a software, uh, basically a piece of software to an industry without any semblance of what that should be priced as or I just find that to be really interesting because like where do you take your cues if not for just throwing spaghetti at the wall and then kind of seeing what sticks and what the market tells you is appropriate and what's not. I don't know the answer to that.
No, for sure. And it almost pains me because on the consulting side, take so much pain to say to people, like, you really need a business plan and you really need projections. And then like I feel a little bit two-faced in that we didn't have one. That said, I think, if you're starting an audiology practice from scratch, I can sit down with you in 30 minutes and we can map out kind of what your first year is going to look like. Yes, there are decisions to make around, are you mobile? Do you have brick and mortar? Are you leasing? Are you buying your building? Which products are you going to fit? How are you going to price them? Are you going to work with TBAs? Right? There's some serious questions to consider, but we can sort of more or less um, ask the right questions and help
Mhm.
make projections. I think with something like MVP, there were just too many question marks. If I had tried to put together any kind of model 2.5 years ago, it would have been so far off, it wouldn't have made any sense. So we've continued to refine from here. But honestly, it's part of what makes it so fun too. Like whenever I'm having like a stressful day for whatever reason, or, we've got problems with our back end technology or whatever it might be, I always try, and I'm not always successful, but I try to remember that like this is the fun part. Like I
Mhm.
know I'll be looking back and I don't know if it's in 1 year or 5 years or 20 years or 50 years and saying like, wow, we created something that didn't exist, that solved a real problem in an industry that needed it, that we loved and were passionate about.
Mm.
And we made it happen. And where we go from here, I don't know, but man, it's a fun ride. And I am trying to keep that in mind even when it, has its stressful moments too.
And you're just looking back like 10 years from now, just cackling about how like remember when we did like remember when we rolled this thing out and we like priced it at, blah 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 and everybody's laughing about, like how stupid were we? But in reality, it's like you didn't know any different at the time. And I
For
agree
sure.
with you that I think that's it's a really cool aspect of like kind of like the day-to-day of just like not really knowing what to expect other than just I'm gonna kind of tinker and I'm gonna just refine this thing a little bit more. For me, like that's just how I sort of saw it firsthand with the when I grew up and I saw Oak Tree being built. It was literally just like every single day you just kind of go in like and you're grinding for lack of better term. You're just kind of like in the um, trenches, just figuring out like what works and what people respond positively or negatively to. And honestly, I think there's a pretty big lesson there in terms of, one of the things on the podcast that we talked about is like, the apathy that you can have where you can get kind of paralyzed by all the decisions that I need to make. And then it's like, you don't ever really do anything. You're just sort of in this like prolonged for you're frozen and you can't figure out like well and I think that the point is like you got to just start and once
Totally.
you start everything starts to kind of fall into place because you kind of realize what's working and what's not. And so I think especially for a lot of like aspiring people out there that are looking to kind of do their own thing and they're trying to figure out what they want to do. That seems to be, you obviously want to have a plan. You don't want to just like blindly go into something, but I think that you can get um, paralysis by basically not being able to make a decision and not being able to just say, all right, we got to start somewhere.
For sure. And just kind of that willingness to test and try things and know you're going to fall on your face sometimes. I remember it was like September of 2022. And I really wanted to go to the Odd Boss conference that was in Anaheim. It's in California where we're located. It was easy to get to. I knew it was our perfect type of practice, right? I mean, it's all owners, it's private practices. It just couldn't be more perfect fit for
Hmm.
MVP. But we had never been to a trade show before. And, I think trade shows have a reputation for being expensive and hard to, justify from an ROI perspective. And so I had to kind of push my team to say, I think we need to try this. And it was such a resounding success. And now trade shows are an absolutely critical part of our strategy with MVP. I think they work very well for us. The software is beautiful. We bring a screen and everybody can see it and play with it and all of that. So, but it was scary spending that money at that time when we
Right.
didn't have it to spend. And, but again, and had it been a total flop, then okay, we would have learned our lesson pretty quickly and easily. On the flip side, it was a success. And of course, we've gotten better and better at how we do trade shows and which ones we go to and how we convert and things like that. So I'm not to say we have all the answers and don't continue to learn. We absolutely do. But I remember that being so scary. And I mostly was going to have to face my brothers if it was a failure. And
Yeah.
so I was
What were
happy
you
that one was a win.
thinking?
But yeah, totally.
Um, do you all have to limit the amount of like when you're at a family event, like the amount of industry talk that's being had? Like, hey guys, can we maybe not talk about something like, or can we talk about something that's not related to this industry? We
For
used to
sure.
joke
I mean,
growing up that it was a sixth family member. Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
I would say we suffer from that too. And I think actually my sister-in-law, she works in the business as well. And she's one who when we're hanging out having wine, like she doesn't want to talk about work. So I have to kind of keep in mind who I'm talking to. Usually when it's the kind of core five of us, I don't know, there's no real limit to it. And we enjoy it, doesn't feel like work. I think you probably know
Mhm.
this to some extent too. When you work with family and you absolutely love what you do, one, it's almost impossible to draw boundaries. I mean, any given 15-minute conversation is going to include stuff about kids
I
and
know.
stuff about work and a funny joke and everything in between. So, it works well for us. I think, um, you have to kind of keep it in check to some extent, but there's a certain amount of it that's just inevitable.
It's like a shared thing across everybody that it's like this common denominator, and it is so hard to avoid.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a funny thing to try to like, maybe curb it a little bit because it does kind of like find its way into just about every conversation I find. I'm like,
for sure.
how did we start talking
Yeah.
about this again? Like I thought we were
It all comes
talking
back to
about.
hearing aids.
Yeah, I know. Um, yeah, so anyway, kind of like looking into the future, as we come to the close here, I'm just curious, like obviously you guys have done a lot of really cool things. I think it's just super cool that you've got like this long tradition in the industry and that you've all kind of had a different like spin on, you know, um of your own contribution, I guess, to the history of hearing healthcare. Where all do you see yourself and MVP and pivot and all that? Like, what is the rest of 2024? What does the future look like? Without getting into, like your product roadmap or anything like that, but just in general, I mean, I think it's amazing that you've already, you've got 900 plus private practices, as part of your customer base. So what an accomplishment that is. But like, what are some things that you can I think it's just super cool that, now you can actually glean some very interesting insights that nobody else really could probably gather. So you do have kind of an interesting perspective from that standpoint. Like what kinds of things I guess can will the continued growth afford you all to do and what are some things you're excited about?
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, this might be kind of a boring answer, but I don't expect a lot of fundamental change. I mean, like I said, our families owned our practice since the early 80s. Like that's not going to change. Like we absolutely love what we do. I think we want to grow obviously and continue to get better at everything we do, both from a patient care and business perspective. We're constantly I was going to kind of say this before when we were talking about a few different things a few minutes ago, but we have businesses that are at almost every different stage, right? We have a very mature, established business that's been around since the 1950s. We have kind of like a medium term business that's been around for a little over a decade. And then we have more or less a startup that's also like coincidentally like creating a new product category. So it's really, really startup-ish. And each of those has a slightly different trajectory over the next year or even 5 years because of that, right? So when it comes to our practice, like we want to make kind of marginal changes around the edges that make that business better for everyone, better for our patients, better for our amazing team members, better for us as managers and leaders, better for our community, all of those sorts of things. Are any of them going to be like massive? Probably not, only because we've been tweaking it around the edges for however 60 plus years now. But I do think, even small changes can have great value for those various stakeholders. Um, I think, on the consulting, the pivot hearing side of things, that we have to constantly be evolving our own knowledge and skills, only because, we all know the industry changes quickly these days. The challenges and opportunities for practices change quickly. You have to always have both ears open, both eyes wide open, looking at what's happening in the industry and with the data, what's changing about our patients, what are the types of things that are working and resonating as patients change. So, we're constantly developing and innovating on that side. So I think, again, those changes aren't going to be like major per se in terms of like the structure of the company or anything like that, more in just constantly trying to evolve and get better and better and stay super relevant with all the things that are going to help private practices. I think MVP will hopefully be unrecognizable in a year from now from where it is today. It's amazing, but our team launches 2 or 3 new features a week. I actually had to stop sending feature release emails because I think people were getting sick of hearing from me. So we're trying to consolidate
You're
and just send
spamming.
one per week. Yeah, that kind of highlights the coolest new feature. So that tool is going to continue to grow and change, I think, fundamentally for private practices, again, based on a combination of our experience and everything we're learning from looking at data and talking to practices about their data. And then, of course, hearing from them what they want and what they need. I think our list of things we'd like to incorporate into MVP is like a lot taller than I am. It's going to take us, we are going to get to them all. Different things are rising to the top all the time, and usually, again, in collaboration with the practices that we're working with. So I think we're going to continue to make it better and better, literally every day and every week. And just really excited about being able to offer such a robust tool to practices to help them achieve their goals, because that's what it's all about.
It's just such a natural progression, like private practice owners to practice management to like now a BI tool that's applicable to all of your members, and then also your members are private practice owners. Like you basically
Yeah.
reverse engineered it for yourself, and you're like, okay, now let's sell this to the masses. But again, I find this to be such an encouraging trend that this is all part of, which is this whole sort of empowerment of the common man, like
For sure.
the single location practice owner, I think in many ways has a lot of a lot of the same kind of tools that it previously had been completely like non-tangible, unless you had
Yeah.
the backing of a billion-dollar company or something like that. So I think that's a really encouraging sign for the profession as a whole, because I think we can all agree that like having a vibrant private practice sector is beneficial for like everybody.
Yep. Definitely agree. Yeah, I would say one of our we have 5 guiding principles at MVP, and one of them is what we call data parity, and just being able to level the data playing field between private practices and any and all of their competitors has been so important to us. Kind of allowing them to fight above their weight class when it comes to BI. And I know there's other companies in the space doing that with different things, whether it's digital marketing or recruiting, right? Just
Mhm.
giving private practices, helping them have the ability to outcompete more corporate competitors, which I think, there's a lot of ways in which they very much can and are better suited to. And then, empowered with the right tools, technology, and people around them, they can, do it in spades. So,
That's awesome. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. One, multi-generation hearing healthcare family member to another.
yeah.
So what's the best way for people to connect with you if they want to follow up and, learn more about all of these different entities that you're part of, and how they could link up?
Yeah, so I would say learn more about MVP at myvitalspro.com. You can email me at Chelsea, Chelsea, at myvitalspro.com. Those are great ways to get in touch with us. And I just want to thank you so much for having me, David. I always enjoy talking to you. It is fun to share kind of our family histories, and I always enjoy our conversations. So thank you.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed this as well. So thanks for everybody who tuned in here to the end. We will chat with you next time. Cheers.